Just after Donald Trump won the U.S. election, the threat of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs have loomed large over the Canadian economy. Ever since, the Buy Canadian movement has gained a lot of momentum. You might have noticed shoppers showing off their Made in Canada grocery hauls on social media and businesses touting their Canadian roots. I'm Assistant Business Editor Michelle Zedekian, and in this special episode of CP Newswatch, business reporter Tara Deschamps joins me for a look at this growing sense of unity among Canadians. Tara, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So as you've dug into these stories, what's the key takeaway so far?
Well, I think we've really learned that these tariffs are something that could impact people's everyday life, and people are taking them quite seriously. It's not some far off political issue. This is something that will change maybe what you have for breakfast all the way to, the gifts you buy for people if the tariffs come into effect in about a month's time.
And who are some of the more prominent people and businesses that you've been talking to in your various reporting?
Well, I've been talking to a lot of small businesses, but we've been hearing from a lot of the bigger companies as well. A lot of them are doing a lot of work to tell people about how they produce their products, how Canadian they are. Every single time I log on to social media or I'm walking somewhere, you see signage with maple leaves. Everyone wants you to know how Canadian they are. They want you to know that they're worth supporting and that if you do support them, this helps sort of this fight against the US and against Trump.
And for consumers that want to buy Canadian, is that easier said than done?
It's a very difficult issue. I've talked to a few experts, one of them, food economist Mike von Massow at the University of Guelph. He told me that how you're able to buy Canadian really comes down to a number of factors, including your personal comfort level, because it's not so easy to always figure out where something was made and to make the right choice with your money. So he gave me a number of examples. For example, if you buy Canadian products that were produced here, but you're buying them from a Walmart or a Costco, does that make sense? There's a lot of these situations that are cropping up that are making it quite difficult. And even products that you think are Canadian because they came from a Canadian company, they might not be made with Canadian ingredients. So I've heard from professors, for example, that we're not growing cotton here. So there's a good chance your t-shirt or whatever other apparel you're buying doesn't have Canadian components. I've also heard that there's a seasonality to things. So if you're big into purchasing vegetables, for example, it's very hard right now to find something like lettuce or broccoli that's from Canada. Or if you like something like salsa or soup, sometimes the vegetables in those products come from Canada. Sometimes they come from another country, depending on the time of year. So it's not an easy thing to buy Canadian, and it comes down to how Canadian you really want to be in your purchasing, how staunch you want to be.
And I feel like a lot of Canadians are reading the labels on products at the grocery store, for example, to see, was this product made in Canada or not? But there's so many different labels for these products: made in Canada, product of Canada. So what do these different labels mean?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ones. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the Competition Bureau have regulations around how you can use a lot of these terms. So the big one is Product of Canada, and that one's kind of the gold standard when you're looking for Canadian products. It generally means that all of the food, the processing, the labor, the components used to make whatever product are Canadian, happened in Canada. A product of Canada can have a small amount of something that was imported, like if it's a food product, for example, like a spice or a flavoring, but most of it is Canadian. And if you're thinking about sort of those non-perishable items, you're thinking of household goods. The way to think of products of Canada would be 98% of the production or manufacturing happens here. The other term you hear a lot is made in Canada. And made in Canada is a bit trickier. So that's about 51% of the producing, the manufacturing happening in Canada. And it also involves sort of the last substantial transformation of the product occurring in Canada. And what that means is that you can get ingredients from all over the world, but the step that sort of turns it into the product that you're buying happens here. So if you are making pizza and you pick up like cheese or sauce from another country, and the company that puts that product together for you, they do that work in Canada, they can label it made in Canada. So those are sort of the two labels that people get tripped up over the most.
But then there are also some very specific labels. There's something like the red maple leaf or the blue cow. What do those mean?
A lot of companies use that red maple leaf a lot, and it doesn't really have a clear meaning. So it's often used to denote that something's a product of Canada, but not always. The Canada Food Inspection Agency and the Competition Bureau both sort of advise anyone who's using that maple leaf to tell people, what exactly is happening in Canada, so it's not so ambiguous. There's also a lot of companies that will just label things as like Canadian, which can be misleading as well. So it's sort of important to do your research to understand what companies are trying to tell you when they use those kinds of Canadian labels. I think you mentioned the blue cow as well, and that one would mean that a product is made with 100% dairy. And that's also seen as sort of a good sign that something has a substantial amount of sort of Canadianness to it.
So you've been talking to a lot of companies that make a wide variety of products about how they're preparing for potential tariffs. What are some of the things that you're hearing from them?
Yeah, a lot of them are dealing with a lot of uncertainty. They're not sure whether to actually believe that these tariffs will come into effect in 30 days. They believe it's a possibility, but they don't know how much to count on it. So they're just sort of doing anything that comes to mind. I talked to a company called Made with Local, and it's caused them so much confusion because they make snack products, and about 15% of them are sold to customers south of the border. They don't really know what they'll have to do with their pricing, what might happen when those products get to the border. So they've stopped accepting orders from the U.S. I talked to a company called Nixit that makes menstrual products, and they've started shipping as much product as they can across the border and stockpiling it there. In the event the tariffs come into effect, they can rely on that stock pile. And then there's companies that are making even more drastic moves. Sheertex, for example, a lot of people will know them because they make those sort of indestructible pantyhose. They're based in Montreal. They laid off 40% of the company on a temporary basis earlier this week, and they named the tariffs as one of the reasons why. So companies are really having to think long and hard about how this will impact the business. Some of them, maybe haven't made immediate moves, but they also realize they'll have to rely on the U.S. a lot less in the future. There's a company I talked to in Calgary called Tapmaster, and they make they make faucets that use a lot of brass that come in from the U.S. And they mentioned to me, they're not really sure that the U.S. will be sort of one of the countries that they will look to more and more in the future. They're looking sort of farther afield for where they can pick up clients for their products.
And something that we have come across, very regularly now is it seems like this Made in Canada label is becoming a top priority in terms of advertising for companies. I don't know how many press releases I've seen lately that is just about a company saying, hey, our product is made in Canada.
Yeah, I am seeing so much of that as well. It's almost inescapable. Companies really want you to know how Canadian they are. They want to sort of dispel anything you've seen on social media, because you've probably seen a lot of people sharing lists of buy this product and not this product, and some of the rationale behind it can be a bit skewed or a bit incorrect. And they're really trying to set the record straight and really using this as like a branding and a marketing moment to lure in new customers. And it can be quite lucrative for them because it's not just something that will build brand awareness for them, but people have products that they really like to stick with. And if you buy something at the grocery store every single week, you're likely to keep up with that habit. But if Buy Canadian is making you rethink some of those products, this is a really golden opportunity for them to all of a sudden try to get people to try something that they wouldn't have tried otherwise. And if they can hook you, they might have a customer for life.
So as we look ahead, there's about 3.5 weeks left until we hit the next tariff deadline. What are you expecting to see from companies as you continue reporting on this issue?
Well, I think we'll see a lot more companies keep up that branding, but also start to make more strategic moves to prepare for that tariff deadline to sort of come into effect. They'll be looking at, whether they need to keep up the stockpiling, whether they can find a new partner, a new country to source ingredients from. They'll be thinking about their staff. Like, I'm sure it's not an easy decision, but some of them will reach the conclusion that they might have to do some layoffs, or they might have to think of some other dramatic move. So we'll be looking for that. And I think I'll also be looking to see how long this Buy Canadian sentiment lasts. It could turn out to be something like, what we saw in the COVID-19 pandemic, with people saying vaccinate and mask, and then sort of that faded away. It didn't remain as strong. So how long will the Buy Canadian sentiment be a hot topic here, and how long will it be something people will stick to, will be something we'll be watching?
And then on the store shelves, what have you been hearing in terms of prices? Are companies saying they're going to absorb the cost, or can consumers expect prices for everyday essentials to rise in the coming weeks?
Well, I have put in requests to a lot of the major Canadian companies, and a lot of them aren't really saying much about what they're going to do with pricing. Some of the experts and the economists are saying to expect prices to rise, to expect, inflation to go up. So you can expect to see some increases. Where they'll come from, I think, is still something that we don't know yet.
Okay, Tara, I know you and the entire team are going to be all over this. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Assistant Business Editor Michelle Zedekian.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow and subscribe. For more of today's top stories, visit thecanadianpressnews.ca.